If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
I can't believe the Pirates season is almost over. Scott and I were talking about that before we jumped on. But I was also kind of thinking that the Pirates are at 70 and 76. And yes, that's below the quote unquote expectations. But all of the narratives and stuff that I'm hearing out there kind of seems like that the team is more at like the 50 win mark. I know that, the narratives were out there and they were put out there by the team prior to the season. This would be a year to contend. This would be a year to compete. But even at that, I mean, Scott, you and I have talked about this previously. I mean, our projections before the season started, I was sitting between 78 and 82. You were, right around that spot as well. So, I mean, the team technically could still meet our expectations, but were we like half, glass half empty people, or we're just, waiting for them not to compete? I mean, where are you at this point in the season?
Well, I agree. It does feel weird that the season is almost over. It feels like just yesterday that I was sitting there on opening day in the snow, and here we are. It's almost fall. Is that the curse of being in the city of champions with teams like the Penguins and the Steelers? That, like you said, it feels like a 50-win season as opposed to where they're actually sitting. But when there's that slight crack, when you crack the door or the window in baseball parlance for contention, um, does that raise the expectation? So now that when you seem like you have a team that can compete, anything short of a winning season or a playoff season is a complete failure, and you might as well have lost 100. Maybe that's just part of the sports culture that we live in.
I can't disagree. I mean, that's where, I mean, everybody talks about, I mean, I watched the Steeler game and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, the Steelers haven't won a playoff game since I believe the year my son was born, and he's about to turn 8. So, I mean, it's not like that there's been, they're always competitive. They're always, in the playoffs. They're never under 500. And I think that's with like the Pirates. I mean, seeing, so many years under 500, 20 seasons in a row, uh, getting the new regime and wanting to see things come together so quickly. And now it seems to be that a lot of people kind of just want to, tear that down. Last week, for anybody that listened to, I was lucky enough to have David Sampson back on. And he kind of shared the sentiment of a lot of Pirates fans that it's like, would you be upset to completely blow up the front office and, the on-field staff of a team that has 75 wins? In some ways, no, but like I said, I caution that you don't know what the plan of the new GM would be. And as a hands-off owner that Bob Nutting would be, it would kind of be what, the plan of that GM. I mean, Shelton right now, I mean, obviously is on the hot seat. I mean, Alex Stumpf has reported it. Dejan Kovacevic has reported it. That basically, this last month was going to be very important for him. And as everybody's talking about, Scott, and we will as well, is that, he gave him that, dreaded vote of confidence, the same vote of confidence you mentioned before the show that was given, to Clint Hurdle, of that, I fully expect him to be back next year. What was your take on those comments?
Vote of confidence or kiss of death? I'm not entirely sure. Like you said, we did see that with Clint Hurdle. Oh, I fully expect him to be back next year, and then they clean house, that weekend essentially. Yeah, I mean, we talked about last time I was on about some of the meltdowns. They've always fought for Shelton right to the end. We've seen more games, I think, where they are playing down in the ninth. They feel defeated. So I don't know if that means that he's lost the clubhouse. I think that if this was a hockey team, he would have been gone a while ago. Because how many times have we seen, the coaches of hockey teams? You lost the locker room, you're gone. Um, have they been lost? Yeah, I think it's probably pretty close. I think it's probably the end for Shelton. But do you really want to ride it out? Should you get somebody else in there? You might as well just ride it out with Shelton for the rest of the season. There's nothing to be won, and then make the tough decision after the season ends. Because what are you going to do? Put Donnie Kelly in for a week or two? That doesn't accomplish a whole lot. We talked about that last time. How he's attached to Shelton so closely. Yeah, fresh start for next year. I think that that's the way things are trending, and I think that Charrington kind of gave himself the out with the "I fully expect," because if they go on a long losing streak to end the season, right there's his out. Things changed, plans changed. He gave himself enough wiggle room.
Yeah, and it's frustrating too, just because uh, I mean, they did play a team that is worse than them. The Miami Marlins are a clearly, worse team, but they did beat the team that they were supposed to beat. They did what they were supposed to do with those types of teams. I mean, they are riding, even though it was a not so great Saturday against the Nationals. I mean, riding a 4 game, winning streak. Uh, Talking about, when they, get no hit by the Cubs, but they actually, take the series. The team, recently has been winning. I mean, I feel like it's just kind of been frustrating to watch because, when they do lose, they lose in these awful ways. They lose, with, Aroldis Chapman. Everybody was saying, Aroldis should be the closer. Well, 2 out of his last 3 outings have not been great for Aroldis, and the last one, resulted in a blown save. The one before that, that wasn't a great outing, was during that, ridiculous comeback victory by the Cubs. So, I mean, and that's the part with like Shelton, and I know we've talked about this as well, and it kind of feels like beating a dead horse is like, who else is Shelton going to put in there? I mean, Dennis Santana, over the past month or so has been like the only real consistent reliever. We've seen flashes from other people. So I think that that's just kind of where it's like these losses that are coming, they either seem, somewhat preventable, or they occur in absolutely horrible fashions by either getting no hit or, setting a record for, being up after the 7th inning and it hadn't happened, over 1,000 times, that team wins and the Pirates don't win. But I mean, the other stuff that's kind of coming out, and it seems like, I mean, planning for 2025 or trying to answer questions in 2025 really seems to be the mantra for the Pirates and maybe even Pirates Twitter at this point in time, because you're talking about maybe a managerial change, people pushing that it goes up a level more than that. And then we, hear from McCutcheon that he wants to come back in 2025. And I think that, with him finishing the season somewhat healthy, I know that knee continues to bother him. I think we all knew this, statement or discussion was coming.
Yeah, I mean, he told Mackey earlier in the season that he wanted to play more years, so this isn't surprising. For the Shelton thing, one more last thing is that, do you think maybe they make a change just to show the players that they need to hold somebody accountable? That accountability is here. That just It's been since the beginning of that regime. Okay, it doesn't matter wins, losses. Let's just get better. Let's, you know, progress. Well, now it's time to win. And so the management team can send a message and say, you guys need to win. And if you don't win, jobs will be lost and there will be consequences. And he needs to be the first one on the chopping block for that. It's not fair to him. I like him a lot. I think he's a good motivator. I don't always agree with the moves that he makes, especially in the bullpen and some lineups. But sometimes it's just a symbol.
And the Pirates have shown, just like you're talking about right there, is the utmost amount of patience with everybody. And that's where like it's tough with the baseball that we watch nowadays because before we knew it was kind of like the manager's choice to a degree. GMs back in the day, I mean, dating ourselves here a little bit. I mean, I'm 45 years old, but when I was watching baseball in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, before analytics became a part of baseball, if a player was in there, I mean, that was the manager's choice,
Mhm.
and they were giving holding people accountable that way. With what we saw from Rowdy Tellez, yeah, Tellez has had a very strong second half of the season, and even a little bit before the All Star break was coming on as well. But 2 months of just absolute ineptitude with Jared Triolo. Jared Triolo has been, hitting a lot better, as of late. Hit a lot better towards the end of last season, but we know the batting average on balls in play played into that. But I mean, they were also, I mean, he's a guy that has been up here the entire season
Yeah.
and has never seen. I mean, his OPS right now is sitting with his hot streak at 615, a 73, OPS plus. And he's had, one of the longest ropes ever, the rope that was shown, to David Bednar. So it's like when I'm trying to think about this stuff, it's like, were these decisions that were made by, the analytics? Was it made by, I don't think Ben Charrington, but probably, someone under Ben Charrington very closely? Were these Shelton decisions to kind of, and I think the only people that really know that are people in the room. People say, Bob Nutting is kind of, he definitely is aloof, but he is involved in these conversations. And if somebody is fired, he is ultimately going to be the one that ends up doing that. I mean, like you talked about before, when getting rid of an entire front office, the coaching staff. He's the one that walked into Clint Hurdle's office. It wasn't Neil Huntington. So that's where like I'm trying to see. I mean, yes, you do want to see that accountability. It was just my thought of just like who is the person that is actually instituting or holding those people accountable.
Yeah, and that's where Shelton can be the sacrificial lamb. It doesn't mean that it's his fault. It's just the symbol to the players that heads are going to roll. But like you guys talked about last week, he doesn't necessarily have a ton of input in the lineup. You know, you guys were talking last week about how a lot of that stuff can be dictated from the baseball ops department. And that's why we have seen in the past lineups that are made days, weeks in advance. Hopefully, we're not still at that point. That could be a product of a developing, rebuilding team. But yeah, I think Triolo is the biggest beneficiary of Hayes's injury because I think it's a completely different situation if Hayes is healthy. Well, to the degree that Hayes can be healthy, I guess. But I think that you'll see things maybe change a little bit if IKF gets brought back for next year, which I assume he will if he does not move in the off season. He can fit that role that we thought Triolo was going to fit, that super utility. Hopefully, they address some of their holes and that they can use him in that way. And I think that's the best way to use him is to bounce him around a little bit, not to just plug him at short and say he's the answer. And we've seen Triolo, who's a great defensive third baseman, but I think he would be best used using that defense around the diamond. But he's got to bring the bat if he's going to have a shot.
Yeah, and the bat has to come, and you mentioned IKF, and I know that we've talked about this previously. Is that I mean, him being like a full time player in one spot kind of just doesn't do him justice as to what he can do. And like throughout his career, that's what he's been. And throughout his career, he's been, before this season in Toronto, a below average hitter. So I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, how they quote unquote answer that question, or what they're going to do moving into 2025. But as we were going before, we were going with McCutcheon, and the DH position is now spoken for because, with his knee, McCutcheon can't play the outfield anymore. And it's no disrespect to him whatsoever. Father Time is undefeated, but he still can hit. I know that before this season, I said, I mean, I was like, I don't know why we're bringing him back. He's not going to make it to the end of the season. And at times, that has kind of come into question. But the one thing I also did say, and people can go back and listen to this, is that, I mean, this isn't really at this point in time, isn't McCutcheon's fault in my mind. And by fault, I mean, he's been an above, league average hitter. I'm looking at it right now, a 114 OPS plus, 20 home runs, a lot more than, I ever saw him having this season. And goes back to being old Cutch, where basically it's like a beach ball being thrown in because he's seeing everything and he's stinging it very well. But in being his fault is that he is the third to fourth best hitter on the team if you include Joey Bart, who doesn't, not a qualified hitter yet, where it's like, yeah, I didn't want him to be in that position. And I think fault might be the wrong word as I'm saying it again, is that I was like, if he is, your third or fourth best hitter, if he's one of the best hitters on your team, then that's a bigger issue. So it's not an issue with McCutcheon, it's more an issue with the lineup.
Mhm.
So in essence, basically saying, Cutch, you want to come back again? I'm all for it. I just want to see the health, just because we do know that, if he would get another injury, and you make that decision and he's your DH, then, there's not really a lot of backup plans there.
I think at this point in his career, managing his workload is key to getting the best out of him. And we've seen that recently with Bart getting more DH opportunities. They're kind of mixing Cruz in there, and Cutch is getting a little more time off of his feet. And I think that he's been better for that. I didn't write down the stat, but I think I saw something. I don't. Maybe you saw this too. MLB Network has Cutch with the lowest chase rate of qualified hitters in Major League Baseball right now. He's still got the eye. He's bringing professional at bats. That's part of why they wanted him in the leadoff spot. They've moved him down the order to try to drive in more runs. I mean, he's got 50 RBIs, 771 OPS. It's he's got the bat there, and I think that getting him to play in the outfield isn't going to happen. He's played 2 games there this year. Started 2 games in right field. Yeah, uh, but I think managing the workload, not having him DH every day. But again, to your point, that comes to the lineup. If he's going to be your third, fourth best hitter, you want him in the lineup. So the rest of the lineup has to step up, and those guys have to produce so that they don't have to lean on a 37, 38-year-old guy as one of the biggest producers in the lineup.
Yeah, and that's like the frustrating part, is just because, like you said, he was moved down because you are trying to generate runs, even though he probably is, better positioned and has had better numbers in the leadoff spot. And like I said, I have no problem penciling him in next year. Put him in the leadoff spot, and see what happens. And like I said, hopefully he stays healthy. I mean, they can possibly. I mean, just thinking about it, like you're saying, giving Bart some days off, uh, giving Reynolds some days off, maybe Cruz some days off. So those can be filled in. It's just, I guess that I'm just frustrated that we're depending on Cutch at this point in time. And like I said, not that he's having a bad season, But I mean, you got to have more guys with the OPSs ranging up over 800.
Mhm.
And what Brian Reynolds does is great. I'm looking right now; he's at 798. Um, I would like to see that a little bit higher from him, just because he's one of those guys that you rely on. But the conversations have been had that Brian Reynolds is a really good baseball player, and maybe he isn't meant to be, or there's a lot of pressure put on him because he has been the best player on this team, for the past few years and has had, really good seasons. But it's like he almost has too much on his shoulders. I mean, Oneil Cruz, first full season, 784. Can't really ask for much better than that. But when you look down there, and I'm thinking that Ben Charrington and his crew thought that possibly Rowdy Tellez would hit more home runs and would have an OPS higher than Cutch's. Obviously, if Jack Sawinski has the type of season he has, last season instead of this season, he has an OPS higher than Cutch's. But then even at that, I maybe Nick Gonzales having one higher, but it seems like that. I mean, everybody knows what it is. I mean, this is not a powerful, star-studded lineup. So that's where it just comes with the frustration, and I think that might even just be a better word, is just being frustrated that Cutch is the third best hitter on your team, and obviously you're going to bring that back if he wants to come back. But it's almost a disservice to Cutch to not surround him with a better lineup. I mean, people talk about Paul Skeens being on the team and being a disservice to him, to any Mitch Keller, Jared Jones, and the pitching staff and what they did to not give them a better lineup. It's like you shouldn't be expecting this much from Cutch. I mean, this is a great season, but he shouldn't be like the player that you're relying on to give you that.
Yeah, a lot has been made recently about what is Kutch's Hall of Fame resume looking like. Is he going to be a Hall of Fame player? And I think in a perfect world, we wanted him to be the bench bat for this World Series team, just to be on the team. Like Maz was on the 71 team. He didn't have a big part. I mean, I wasn't alive for that, but from what I understand, he didn't have a big part in that team, but he was on the team. And if we could get Kutch that World Series ring, I think that that helps his resume. But to your point with the lineup, let's think of the power that was lost versus expectations. You mentioned Rowdy, but let's not forget Michael A. Taylor, Edward Olivares. Those guys had big 20 plus home run years last year. And so I'm sure that Charrington was expecting those guys to come in and provide a lot more power than they did. So I think that's the thing with the market that Pittsburgh is in, is that you look at these guys, and in baseball, we know baseball's tough and you can't always, it's like the commercials for financial things, past performance is not indicative of future earnings. That's the truth for baseball players too. Just because a guy hit 25 home runs last year doesn't mean that he's going to do. How many home runs does Michael A. Taylor have this year? What, five maybe, something like that. So he's about 20 short of what he was last year. Yeah. So I think that you see these guys on paper and you say, oh well, that'd be a good fit, but they just don't produce, and that's a big part of where that fell short this year.
Yeah, and the crazy part is that, I mean, before the season, I think a lot was made of the Pirates not having, I think it was four hitters that had hit over 20 home runs. It's not something that the Pirates do. And with Oneil Cruz, like Oneil Cruz is hitting better. If it's going to sound weird that he's hitting better, but we don't see the power numbers. Do you know what I
What,
mean?
a
It's
month? Yeah, a month without a home run.
Yeah, and even with Rowdy, when he had kind of come on, he was hitting well, hitting the ball hard, but it was a lot of singles, maybe some doubles, but still not, a lot of home runs. Even with McCutcheon, the way he was stinging the ball earlier in the season, he was getting robbed a bunch and different stuff, but it still wasn't even that home run potential. I mean, Nick Gonzales seems to be a guy that strikes the ball well, almost every single time he's up there. But we're getting like, it's like I said, it's weird to say because I mean, it's today's game. I mean, if we had, I feel like these hitters, in the early 90s or whatever, like, I mean, we would be like celebrating because these are guys that are stinging the ball hard, and some of them are going over the wall, but they're not all doing that. But in today's game, and especially with as much as this team strikes out, I mean, you kind of have to have those power numbers. If you had guys that walked a lot, didn't strike out a lot, and hit the way that the Pirates have been hitting this season and not hitting for power, the team might look a little bit different. And Nick Gonzales, the guy is just, when you mentioned like McCutchen has, I think I was looking it up here and I was looking at the RBIs when you were talking about it. And it's like, Nick Gonzales is only like 5 RBIs behind McCutchen. He's only 9 RBIs behind, Rowdy Tellez. And these guys, have played, almost an entire season, at the big leagues. He didn't come up till a little bit later and then, dealt with some injuries. But then I scroll across and I mean, I look at that OPS and I look at that OPS plus 696, 93. Is he the answer at second base next year?
Yeah, I think so. He went through a rough patch, but since he came back from his injury, he's been doing better, uh, getting hot again. And I think that he, at this point, seems to be a doubles hitter, but I think that he can grow into a guy that can put the ball over the fence more. But I think that having a guy like that driving in as many runs is a product of guys like McCutcheon and Cruz batting better, and that constant of Brian Reynolds. Having guys on base in front of Nick Gonzalez has been the key for him, and that's where McCutcheon has fallen short because when he was batting leadoff, how historically bad has the 7, 8, 9 position been in the lineup for the Pirates this year? It just seems like once you get to that bottom part of the lineup, okay, well, let's move on to the next. I'll go get a sandwich because it's going to be the next inning before you know it, just up and down, lots of strikeouts. They need guys that will get on base so that it's not a bad thing to be a doubles hitter if you have a guy on second or a guy on third or even first to move them all the way over to third. It being doubles hitter isn't necessarily a bad thing, um, like it may be portrayed. But in the position the Pirates are in, they need the home runs because the other guys aren't getting on base.
Yeah, and you need that like instant offense, and
Instant
it's
offense. Yeah.
yeah, it just definitely hasn't been happening, and I feel like that's kind of maybe the most frustrating, a part of this season. But I mean, you were asking for, like you mentioned before, like Tellez and Taylor and different stuff. I mean, Tellez, it was an absolute, and I know that Brian Reynolds does have power, but it's not like he has, like ridiculous power.
Well, you look
It's
up and you look up in September and he's got over 20 home runs, and you just don't, when you watch him every day, you don't see that progression happen. But then you just look at the stats and boom, oh, I didn't realize he hit that many.
Yeah, he definitely hit more than it seemed, but it was almost like, well, people saw him getting more power last season and getting up towards the 30 home runs that he would eventually end up getting over that mark, because that kind of seems to be the path that a lot of major leaguers take. That it's like once they get up to that point, it's like go and more and more. And with Reynolds, it was just like, no, I mean, he's going to be a guy that can hit you 20 to 30 home runs. He may get over that mark if he hits, a little bit of a power hot streak, but for the most part, he's going to kind of fall in there. Like I said, I just keep going back to Cruz and him just sitting on those 19 home runs, that you thought that when he started hitting better, that would, he'd get like probably like 6 in a week or something, and he would be, starting to march his way. And that just may be him, kind of evolving as a player. And that might be the step that we see him take next year. It's just like I just don't want to go into this off season kind of counting on these things. And it kind of seems like, the stuff that, you had brought up with Rowdy and, Taylor, and even, players that they brought in that they had certain expectations for and they didn't meet those expectations. It's just like I want to go in, and I know it's not possible, as to having, more of those answers than questions. And it kind of seems like every single year we go into an off season and it, we're just trying to answer more questions.
We want them to make moves, and they make the moves, and the moves don't pan out. So it's not a lack of trying. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're right. You're maybe for Oneil Cruz, maybe this is a step. Maybe these are the baby steps, making more contact, or starting with having a better eye at the plate, not chasing, especially against lefties. Those breaking balls, the down and away breaking balls were his kryptonite for such a long time. You're seeing him lay off those more. And so that's step one. Step two, making more contact. Maybe we haven't seen step three yet, where he is elevating. And I'm okay with seeing that development, because there's a plan that they're putting into place, and it's getting results, and that's promising.
Yeah, I don't want it to seem like that I'm like frustrated with what's going on. It's just that it was a very, like I said, it's just a very strange thing to kind of look up and see. Just like looking and seeing him, you know, doing what we were hoping that he would do in center field, and kind of what we talked about.
Especially when you see this at the end of the season, because then it's like, well, can he sustain it through the off season? Because there's such a long layoff that you come back in the spring, and Key Brian Hayes is a perfect example of that. How hot he finished the season last year, and he comes back into spring, and he's been working through that whole off season. Did he tweak something? Did he try to get too cutesy with some of the stuff, and he fell back into old habits? Is that going to happen with O'Neill again? Is he going to go so long without facing major league pitching that some of those things that he has progressed on, is he going to regress? That's the unanswered question that we just there's no way of knowing.
Yeah, and we are going to have an entire off season to talk about these types of topics. I just kind of wanted to get them out there a little bit, just because I mean that's what people are talking about, is who should you bring up? We've seen Billy Cook up. Like I said, I didn't think that it was a bad move or a good move. It wasn't something that I needed to see, but seeing it, it's not a bad thing either. I just don't want people to, if he goes on a complete cold streak, that we have our question answered, and that he's not a piece moving forward, or if he goes completely off, that they say what they were saying about Triola last year, is we don't need a first baseman because we've seen him play first base. I don't want people to kind of fall into those narratives.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I think that we don't know enough about him, and there's a lot more to be told. And I don't think that the month of September is the place to get your answers. We're going to get more in spring, and there's a long way to go, and a lot of pieces of the puzzle that need to be unveiled before we can really make a decision on that. It is just his first, few games in the majors, and nobody has answers on what a guy truly is at that point.
Well, everybody, as you're noticing here now, and you heard earlier, this is a newly formed Bucks in the Basement. Scott has been gracious enough to come on and join me as a co-host. He's not a guest anymore. He is a regular part of this. He'll be a regular part of this moving forward. And in our first, I guess it would be the inaugural re-rolling out or rebranding or whatever it would be of Bucks in the Basement here, Scott, I'm just happy we didn't get into the Jackson Merrill Paul Skeens discussion.
No, I'm going to stay clear of that one.
And we didn't get to your Bubba Chandler. We'll talk about Bubba Chandler next week.
We'll have a lot of time to do that. Yep.